Part 1. The Invisible Spy. The true art of espionage is the ability to hide in plain sight. The greatest, most devastating spies in history are not the ones who engage in high-speed chases, they are the ones whose names you never learn until it is far too late. The ultimate embodiment of this principle is found in the extraordinary and perplexing case of Sir Anthony Blunt. His life seemed entirely predestined for aristocratic greatness. A brilliant graduate of Cambridge University, boasting direct familial ties to the British royal family, he was the very picture of establishment respectability. His brilliance as a polymath, his flawless fluency in multiple European languages, and his unmatched renown as a world-class art historian made him virtually unquestionable. But hidden deep beneath his polished veneer of aristocratic refinement lay a treacherous secret that, when eventually revealed, shook the British establishment to its very core. For decades, Anthony Blunt operated as a highly effective Soviet spy, a central figure in the infamous Cambridge 5 espionage ring. His esteemed position within British counterintelligence, and later his prestigious role within the inner circle of the British royal family, granted him unfettered access to the most highly classified secrets at the most critical junctures of the Second World War. 34 years passed before Blunt's treason was finally exposed to the world by British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher in 1979. Yet, as profoundly shocking as his betrayal was, a newly emerged hypothesis suggests a far darker reality: that Blunt may have also operated as a secret agent for Nazi Germany. If true, this double betrayal would have prolonged the war and cost thousands of Allied lives. Labeling Anthony Blunt as the most dangerous spy in modern history might seem like sensational hyperbole, but when you consider the sheer volume of top-secret information he possessed, it may well be the absolute truth. Part 2. The Cambridge Recruitment. Anthony Blunt was born on the 26th of September, 1907, in the affluent town of Bournemouth. His mother was a distant relative of the British royal family, making Anthony a third cousin to the Queen Mother. The Blunt family was thus deeply entrenched within the upper echelons of the British establishment, a fact that would automatically open many professional doors for young Anthony and shield him from the scrutiny that ordinary citizens faced. He attended Trinity College, Cambridge, graduating with a brilliant first-class degree in 1930. But Cambridge in the 1930s was more than just a university. It was an ideological battleground. The polarized political climate, the devastation of the Great Depression, and the terrifying rise of violent fascism in continental Europe led many brilliant minds to view Soviet communism as the necessary antidote to all the world's problems. Anthony Blunt was also a homosexual in an era when such an orientation was strictly illegal in Great Britain. This inherent reality placed him at severe personal odds with the society he lived in, making an ideology that sought to overthrow that establishment deeply attractive to him. While at university, Blunt became involved with a secret society of intellectuals known as the Cambridge Apostles. Through this group, he formed close bonds with other radical individuals, most notably the charismatic Guy Burgess. It was Blunt's deep involvement with the Apostles that placed him firmly in the crosshairs of Soviet intelligence. Recruited around 1934, Blunt's initial role was to act as a talent spotter. He was instrumental in recruiting the other men who would form the core of the infamous spy ring: Kim Philby, Guy Burgess, Donald MacLean, and John Cairncross. He also recruited an American student, Michael Straight, a decision whose monumental significance would only be realized decades later. Part 3. Infiltrating the establishment. Having operated as a quiet sleeper agent throughout the pre-war years, Anthony Blunt's public career as an art historian was highly distinguished. However, it was the catastrophic outbreak of the Second World War in September of 1939 that saw Blunt fully activated for the Soviet cause. Using his aristocratic connections, specifically his friendship with Baron Victor Rothschild, Blunt secured a position within British intelligence. By 1940, he had managed to secure a transfer to the counter-espionage division, becoming the personal assistant to the division chief. The Soviets now had eyes and ears at the very highest levels of the British government. In 1942, Blunt was tasked with heading up a highly sensitive project codenamed Operation Triplex. This was a covert operation to closely monitor the diplomatic missions of neutral countries. Blunt's primary task was to develop methods of intercepting sealed diplomatic bags as they were transported back to their home countries. His highly trained operatives would open the bags, photograph every document, and reseal them perfectly, leaving no trace of tampering. British intelligence was delighted by the massive haul of confidential information it produced. But the Soviet intelligence agencies were equally delighted, as they received perfectly photographed copies of all the intercepted intelligence, directly from Anthony Blunt. As the war headed towards its bloody climax in 1944, Blunt was named the official liaison with the Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force. This incredibly sensitive position gave him access to key operational plans, including the monumental upcoming invasion of Normandy and the deception tactics of Operation Fortitude. As a matter of course, Blunt passed on absolutely everything he knew directly to the Soviets. Between 1941 and 1945, Anthony Blunt supplied Soviet intelligence with no less than 1,771 top-secret documents. Part 4. Agent Josephine and the Nazi connection. Anthony Blunt's extensive involvement with Soviet espionage is a well-established historical fact, but explosive research suggests a far more sinister betrayal, that Blunt may have also been intimately involved in the betrayal of Operation Market Garden. This ambitious Allied offensive, launched in September of 1944, saw 40,000 paratroopers dropped deep behind enemy lines in the Netherlands. Its bold aim was to capture key strategic bridges and pave the way for a rapid advance straight into the heart of Nazi Germany. However, the operation was an absolute disaster. More than 17,000 Allied troops were lost. The shocking hypothesis links Anthony Blunt to a highly mysterious figure known only as Agent Josephine. Josephine was a Nazi spy who passed critical, highly accurate intelligence about Operation Market Garden directly to the Germans, allowing them to perfectly anticipate the Allied airborne attacks. When British codebreakers began intercepting communications from Agent Josephine, they identified the handler as a German lawyer operating out of Stockholm. And who was put in charge of investigating and identifying this mysterious mole? None other than Anthony Blunt. When a British agent stationed in Sweden managed to copy the contents of the German handler's safe, he brought the explosive documents back to London and presented them to Blunt in December of 1943. The documents contained information that could only have been leaked from the highest echelons of British intelligence. Blunt angrily dismissed the documents as fakes, took them into his possession, and seemingly buried the investigation. If Blunt was indeed Josephine, his role in sabotaging Market Garden aligned perfectly with Soviet interests. Had the operation succeeded, Allied forces would have reached Berlin long before the Soviets. By ensuring the bloody failure of the airborne operation, Blunt was actively advancing Joseph Stalin's territorial ambitions, ensuring Eastern Europe would fall behind the Iron Curtain. By serving the interests of both Stalin and Adolf Hitler, Blunt's espionage directly contributed to the violent deaths of thousands of Allied soldiers. Part 5. The royal connection. After the war ended, Blunt officially left the shadowy world of intelligence to return to high academia. In 1945, he was appointed Surveyor of the King's Pictures by King George VI. This prestigious role brought him into immediate, close contact with the royal family and gave him unfettered access to all royal residences. His proximity to the monarchy provided him with an impenetrable aura of respectability that deflected any lingering suspicions about his wartime activities. In August of 1945, the king personally tasked Blunt with a highly secret mission. Blunt was sent to a castle in Germany to retrieve historical correspondence. In reality, his true objective was to recover highly damaging letters that would have exposed the Duke of Windsor, the former King Edward VIII, as a fervent admirer of Adolf Hitler. The potential political fallout was deemed so critical that the mission was sanctioned by Prime Minister Winston Churchill. Blunt successfully recovered the letters, but it is widely believed that he secretly photographed the most damaging documents and passed them directly to his Soviet handler. Even though his direct espionage activities diminished, Blunt maintained covert contact with Soviet agents. He continued in this treacherous fashion until 1951, the year that his fellow spies, Guy Burgess and Donald MacLean, sensationally defected to the Soviet Union just as the net was closing in around them. Controversially, Blunt managed to sneak into Burgess's apartment prior to the arrival of investigators and meticulously remove incriminating evidence that would have explicitly linked him to the spy ring. Part 6. The unmasking. With the physical evidence destroyed, Blunt managed to survive the intense interrogations that followed the defections. In 1956, his apparent exemplary service to the crown was even rewarded with a knighthood. Sir Anthony Blunt had become untouchable, but the cracks in this flawless facade finally broke wide open in 1964. Michael Straight, the American student whom Blunt had recruited decades earlier, applied for a high-level government position in the United States. Terrified that his secret past would be discovered during a background check, Straight voluntarily confessed to the authorities. He named Anthony Blunt as the man who had recruited him into Soviet intelligence. On the 23rd of April, 1964, a senior British intelligence officer visited Blunt's elegant apartment in London. He informed the aristocrat that they now possessed concrete proof of his treason. Initially, Blunt steadfastly denied the accusations. The breaking point only came when the officer offered Blunt complete immunity from public prosecution in exchange for a full confession. Weighing his rapidly dwindling options, Blunt finally admitted to his decades of espionage with a single calm sentence. It is true. Shockingly, his elite social position continued to protect him. The British authorities made the highly controversial decision to keep Blunt's treason a total state secret, desperate to avoid a monumental public embarrassment that would devastate the reputation of the intelligence services and the royal family. Blunt was allowed to retain his knighthood and continue his prestigious work. It was not until 15 years later, in 1979, that the truth finally erupted into the public domain. Investigative journalists, tipped off by disgusted intelligence officers, forced the government's hand. On November 15, 1979, Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher stood before the House of Commons and officially revealed to the world that Sir Anthony Blunt, the esteemed aristocrat and friend to the royals, had been one of the most damaging spies in history. Stripped of his knighthood and his reputation, the man who had hidden in plain sight for a lifetime died in disgrace 4 years later, taking the absolute darkest extents of his betrayals with him to the grave.